Hello, and welcome to Speaking of Courage, where we discuss stories of America's greatest heroes, those that are in the Medal of Honor throughout our nation's wars. A lot of these stories are going to be household names or people that at least military historians know. Again, like Audie Murphy, some of the other soldiers and Marines that we have covered. Today we're going to talk about a soldier who was once called America's greatest soldier of the Great War of World War I, but now he's largely forgotten. Most people don't know his name, even people with, passing knowledge of American history or of military history. Today we're going to be talking about Major Samuel Woodfill, who earned the Medal of Honor in World War I and saw extensive service throughout the world prior to that. Woodfill's one of those characters, kind of like Wild Bill Hickok, who was huge at a time and is not so much remembered now. He's overshadowed by other people. World War I, you might think of Sergeant York is usually going to be the first name that comes to mind. Maybe even Eddie Rickenbacker or some of those others. Most people don't know much about World War I in general. And those that do, like I said, Samuel Woodfill's not one of the first names that come to mind. But in his time, he was very touted, very well decorated, and he was very, very highly honored. Surprisingly, it's difficult to get accurate information about Woodfill and some of these other guys. The further you go back in history, Vietnam, World War II, World War I, and especially prior, you start to get this mix of legend and hero worship sometimes. Some of the books I read on Woodfill leading up just don't seem that accurate to me, and some of the accounts are very contradictory. So take it as it comes. I did my best to use contemporary accounts and newspaper articles and quotes from soldiers who were there, as opposed to just more recent books. There was one I read that was very much seemed to be written by an author who liked to fill in a lot of details that I just don't think seemed accurate. So it's hard sometimes. But the Medal of Honor citation is going to be written shortly after, based on accounts of people who were there. And again, newspaper articles, interviews, things like that. That's where we try to get the accurate information. But unfortunately, unless you have a video camera event, unless something's captured on video or audio, like some of the more recent ones with the drone footage or the audio from Iraq War, it's very difficult to get an accounting of what happened. But with that being said, I'm going to do my best to tell the story of Major Sam Woodfill, who fought in World War I. Now, Sam Woodfill, I'm going to call him Sam. Sam Woodfill was born on January 6, 1883, near Madison, Indiana, and he was of Welsh background. And this was a very difficult upbringing. There's no electricity. Indiana, you can imagine, is very cold, so it's going to be freezing in the wintertime. Very hardscrabble, tough life. And his dad was a veteran. His dad had actually fought in the Mexican-American War and the Civil War, so he was quite a bit older. The Mexican-American War would have been a bit exotic, especially at that time, because it had been so far past. But the Civil War was this huge event that shaped the nation, right? It was more important than the Revolutionary War in a lot of ways. And to someone like Sam growing up, he's going to be idolizing his father, who was a Civil War veteran. He's going to be growing up hearing those stories. In this rural area he grew up in, too, he's going to be spending a lot of time exploring the fields and forests near his homes and watching his dad and his older brothers hunt. And you can imagine hunting or watching your family hunt, going through those woods and imagining seeing, great armies that he would be fighting, kind of like his father had in his mind. So when he was really little, he was too young to go hunting, but by the time he was 10 years old, he started sneaking his dad's rifle out of the house to hunt small game. And according to the Indiana Historical Bureau, when his father found out that he had been sneaking out with the gun, he wasn't mad because he was impressed with how good he was. So he ended up letting him hunt whenever he wanted to, which is something that pleased Sam. He ended up, like the other boys, he's going to receive local education in those rural schoolhouses and get what kind of education was available at the time. And when he was 13 years old, his dad died. Again, his dad was a bit older, but that's going to be a huge thing. He does have older brothers, but when you lose your patriarch of the family and you're in this rural environment, that's going to add a lot more responsibilities. And then all the things that come with it, losing your father at that young of an age has got to be very hard. It's got to be very mentally difficult, especially when you idolize someone like that who was a soldier and had been all these places, and he probably was a mythical almost figure in his life. In 1898, the Spanish-American War broke out. That's something that we haven't talked about a lot on here, and again, that's another one of those events in American history that's largely overshadowed and largely forgotten in those days, or these days, but it was huge. It was monumental in how it shaped our country and the effects it had on our nation. Now, Sam had grown up hearing his dad's stories and he wanted adventure, so he actually tried to enlist to go fight in the Spanish-American War, but he was only 15 years old, so they did turn him away. Sam waited a few more years, and then he again tried to join the army. Sam waited a few more years, and when he was 18, he did join the army in 1901, and he was initially assigned to the 11th Infantry Regiment. At this point, because of the Spanish-American War, we had gained holdings all over, including the Philippines. Puerto Rico, Guam, a lot of other places. So Sam was actually going to be sent to the Philippines by way of San Francisco. So a kid growing up in Indiana hearing these stories, but now you're going to be traveling across the country by train, going to San Francisco, which is this big city, which you would have probably heard about prior to, and then shipping over to the Philippines. So this is going to be a grand adventure. But the Philippines is a very difficult place to see service around 1901, 1902. One of the really forgotten wars in American history is the Philippine-American War and then the Moro Rebellion. The Philippine-American War was 1898, 1899 to 1902. And it was a guerrilla war, essentially, right? Similar to Vietnam, the fighting in the jungles of the Philippines. Philippines is a massive amount of small islands, but some of these islands are going to be very, very dense foliage, jungle, again, terrain, hot, sweaty, miserable, and these are going to be soldiers in wool or khaki that are going to be moving through. So think of Vietnam-type combat with 1899, 1900, turn of the last century equipment, right? So it's going to be very, very, very difficult. And these Filipinos, revolutionaries, freedom fighters, insurgents, however you want to call them, are going to be fighting with hit and run tactics. So the Americans are going to be on patrol, hot, sweaty, miserable. They're going to be getting attacked from the jungle, and they're going to be trying to fight back. There's going to be heavy rains, monsoon season. Again, just think of all the things you think of in Vietnam, but think of it around the turn of the last century. It's very, very miserable. And it's crazy. The Philippine War, like I said, it's largely forgotten. The Philippine-American War is usually separate from the Moro Rebellion. Philippine-American War ending in 1902, we lost over 4,000 American troops. That's a higher casualty rate than Iraq and Afghanistan, right? And the population was much, much smaller back then, and the amount of troops we had there was much, much smaller. So it was a vicious little war that is largely forgotten. And Sam's going to be a part of this. He's going to be stationed in Leyte, which is the largest island, I believe, in the Philippines, and he's going to be involved in a number of conflicts with these Filipino guerrilla forces. Eventually, his service is going to end, and he's going to stay in the Philippines in 1904 after seeing action against these Moro tribesmen who were Muslim and the regular insurgency. During this time, though, he's going to be gaining experience and he's going to be gaining respect among his peers, and he was actually known as a crack shot, and he was described for his honest and faithful service. And this is a really interesting time in American history. President McKinley is going to be assassinated. Teddy Roosevelt is going to become the president, the youngest president that we've ever had. Kennedy was the youngest elected, but Teddy was the youngest president. And, you could go down giant rabbit holes of Teddy Roosevelt if you're looking for interesting history. But this is the world that he's a part of now, right? After serving in the Philippines, this hot, dense jungle, Woodfill is actually going to be transferred to Alaska, and he's going to end up at Fort Egbert until its closure in 1911. So going from one extreme to the other. But again, the average American wouldn't have traveled much in this time, and Woodfill has gone from Indiana, San Francisco, the Philippines, seeing these different cultures, hearing these different languages, and now in Alaska, which is still a large frontier. But imagine at the time, right? The gold rush, Alaskan gold rush, the Klondike gold rush was 1899 with this massive migration and movement looking up there. But it was very Wild West. I've been to Alaska, and I don't remember which location it was at, but one of the cemeteries is just filled with these crazy stories of somebody robbing a bank and getting blown up by dynamite, and Soapy Smith getting shot on the docks, and these gunfights, and very, very wild time. So civilization was new in a lot of ways to the European immigrants and the American immigrants that were over there in Alaska. So it's a wild place, and that's where he's going to be at. Alaska had officially become a territory in 1912. So they're going to be taking a ship up the coastline. And again, if you've been on an Alaska cruise, you see it, it's beautiful. I just imagine a kid from Indiana around this time getting to see all these things, and it's pretty cool. While he was in Alaska, he continued to hone his marksmanship. He actually would hunt large game. So there's, like, I imagine, a bit of downtime. Their primary mission is they're maintaining the telegraph wire up there, these troops. So they're going to be in their attempt at cold weather gear at the time. I can just imagine how awful that would be. But he's also going to be going out and hunting moose and caribou, wolves, bear, bighorn sheep. They actually had to build their own barracks. And he was made a mule skinner while he was there, which is an old Army MOS. To me, Alaska would be just miserable and awful. I can't stand the cold. I can't stand when my socks are wet or my feet are wet or my hands are wet. But Woodfill thrived in the danger and the adventure of turn of the century Alaska with this primitive equipment, hacking their way out. So he's already becoming a leader of men, and he's already becoming somebody who he's probably not going to be able to go back to Indiana at this age and just live a calm life. So this is kind of what he loves and what he needs. And because of this, he actually volunteered to stay in Alaska. So he didn't want to leave, so he remained, and he served at Fort Gibbon after the previous fort had closed. In 1912, he was moved again, and he was stationed in Fort Thomas in Kentucky, where he served for about 2 years. So he's clearly making a career out of the military, which is somewhat unusual at this time. In our times, it makes sense to do a 20-year enlistment and do a career path. But at this time, military life is very, very rough. It's very difficult. It's very hard on the body. So not a lot of people are going to have what it takes to be able to do this. And Sam is clearly doing that. In 1914, he was dispatched as part of a force to guard the Mexican-American border during the Mexican Civil War. This is Pancho Villa time, etc., right? Pancho Villa came across the border and raided Columbus, New Mexico. There's a lot of going on. There's American interests in Mexico that are being threatened. There's Mexican guerrillas and revolutionaries who are fighting for what they believe in. This danger on the border is very real. So we're sending American troops down. We're sending the cavalry down, and he's going to be a part of that. So again, just to restate, he's gone from Indiana, San Francisco, served in the Philippines, fought insurgents and guerrillas, served in Alaska hunting large game, back to Kentucky where he served as a professional soldier. Now he's on the Mexican border, and border duty is very rough, but also very, very boring, right? There's not a lot to do. No iPhones, things like that. I can imagine the troops out there playing cards, and when they're on their downtime, just trying to cover their face from the dust, everything else. Their mission was successful, though. Their presence was enough to halt the cross-border violence, and he did not see any action there, so he's just going to be stationed there. And then he's going to return to Fort Thomas, Kentucky in 1917. And by this time, World War I is raging. So the punitive expedition into Mexico, searching for Pancho Villa, and then his job on the border. In a lot of ways, this was a dress rehearsal for World War I. This was the U.S. military getting to test out their tactics equipment, their mechanized warfare for the upcoming war that we were more than likely going to be a part of, even though we were trying to stay out of it. So by 1917, he's going back to Kentucky. World War I had been raging since 1914, and we're talking millions and millions of casualties in World War I. These European armies were just slaughtering each other for inches of ground. It was a horrific, devastating war like the world had never seen. We've talked about it on other episodes, but we're going from a guy like Samuel Woodfill growing up in Indiana where there's no running water, no electricity, no heat. You're not really leaving your hometown, right? We're having bolt action rifles, and now in World War I, we've moved to machine guns. We have airplanes. We're dropping bombs. We have Zeppelins. We have submarines. We have, massive, we have tanks. The world is changing for the far worse as far as battlefield technology, and the technology is surpassing the tactics. So these guys are just getting slaughtered, and this is what's going on overseas. And in 1917, the U.S. did declare war on Germany, and our army greatly expanded. So this small little peacetime army we had with guys like Woodfill, these professional soldiers and adventurers, and these young guys that were just going and doing an enlistment and getting out. Now the army has to get massive. So by now he's a sergeant, and he's an experienced career soldier, while most of these recruits have no experience at all. Most of the guys joining the army or getting drafted into World War I have never left their hometowns. They know very little. They don't have any military experience. If they're lucky, they're hunters and they might know rifles, but they don't know drill and ceremony. They don't know discipline. They don't know a lot of these things. But Woodfill's about as experienced as you can get. He's also a big, strong, and muscular man. Some of the documents, again, and the newspaper accounts, they list him differently, but he's around 6 feet tall and 210 pounds. He was sometimes described as ramrod straight. One of the articles said he was 5'11", 180, so you can see the variance there, right? But they said he had a 42-inch chest, which is interesting to note, but it gives you an idea of how big these guys were. In World War I, the average soldier was I think less than 5'9" on average, probably a bit shorter than that even. So he's a big dude. He's going to be a big, imposing dude. And his size and experience is going to inspire confidence in these men, and they're going to come to look to him as a professional soldier. Because of his skill and experience, he actually became an officer after he attended a 2-month officer training course, and he received a temporary wartime rank of second lieutenant while he was in San Antonio. So that's an interesting thing that the military is doing, is a temporary rank, right? In the past, we've had brevet promotions like Custer and things, but World War I, you're going from this minuscule army to this massive army. You're going to reward those guys that are there, that have been there, that know what they're doing. So it's going to be a big jump for him. And as he's preparing to deploy with this massive American Expeditionary Force, in his personal life, he's going to actually end up getting married as well to his longtime girlfriend, Lorena Wiltshire. And they got married on December 26, 1917. They had been together since he met her in 1911 when he had returned from Alaska. And supposedly she was a descendant from Daniel Boone, is one of the things that you'll see mentioned in the newspaper articles, which is a very cool fact, right? Their descendants have quite the lineage and quite the heritage. Shortly after this, he was given command of a machine gun company in the 5th Division of the U.S. Army Expeditionary Forces. And finally, in April 19, his unit is going to sail for France along with thousands of other American soldiers. Most of these troops are brand new and raw, right? Months before they had been civilians, and now they're in uniforms with rifles, which is going to be crazy. And just to emphasize, Europe's been at war since 1914, and now it's April of 1918. We're finally pushing these troops over. Prior to that, we've been sending troops, but he's finally going to be going over. And they're going to be going over on the USS Philadelphia, which is a troop ship. And you can imagine in 1918 what a troop ship would be like. Just massive crammed bodies on those bunks going across the seas. And they're at danger of U-boats. The Germans were, or the Central Forces, the Imperial Forces, the Germans were huge on U-boat warfare, submarine warfare, sinking our ships, crossing the Atlantic. So this is going to be a big threat. So they're going to have to move in these massive columns, and they're going to be using zigzag formations to try to avoid these U-boats, which would be pretty terrifying because you're helpless at sea. You're a soldier. You're not a sailor. You're just up on deck or below deck, just kind of waiting and hoping nothing would happen. But you really have no control out of that. When they arrived in Europe, the 5th Division actually stayed in the rear until October of 1918 when they were sent to take part in the Meuse-Argonne offensive. And you went off the troop ship. Now you're going to be in these cattle cars. They used to have a thing called 40 and 8 Society, which was a veteran society, because these cattle cars, they could either hold 40 men or 8 mules. So with all your equipment, you're going to be packed in, and they're going to be sent to the front. While they were in the rear, they're not completely safe, right? They're still going to be facing artillery. There's going to be these large attacks, and you're going to hear the sounds of devastation from the front line away. The sky's going to be filled with Zeppelins and planes. Zeppelin's like a hot air balloon, essentially. The Goodyear balloons you're seeing. So Europe's going to be ravaged. They're going to be moving to the front. They're going to be seeing these devastation, this destroyed towns. The sky's going to be gray and filled with all these exotic things, and this artillery is just going to be constant. And the Meuse-Argonne is actually the final Allied offensive of the war. Of the war. If you haven't seen, or you get a chance, check out our episode on Charles Barger. We went into that in pretty good detail there. So they're going to move into the trenches to be a part of this, and trench warfare is just awful. I can't imagine anything worse. In addition to the combat, in addition to the constant shelling, in addition to the death and dying everywhere, it's just going to be muddy and wet and miserable. Socks are constantly wet. There's going to be large rats moving through, eating your food, eating the dead bodies that are there. There's going to be lice. There's going to be the threat of gas, so you're going to be hearing those alarms, and you're going to be trying to get your gas mask on. So it's just a terrifying experience. And these other soldiers have been there a while, so they're going to be learning from the French soldiers that in some cases have been fighting for several years, surviving this, right? Going over the top, pushing forward, running into no man's land, getting cut down by machine guns for a few yards, just watching waves and waves of bodies be destroyed, people being reduced to bits and pieces as they're exploded by artillery or by grenades, and then moving back to the lines and then trying to get sleep while you're on constant rotation, never knowing if the enemy's going to come, and then you're going to hear those gas alarms and trying to get your masks on. It's just going to be a terrifying, terrifying experience. But that's what these guys had to face. And Woodfill's going to quickly be promoted to first lieutenant. And on October 12th, 1918, Woodfill led his company in an attack near the village of Cunel. And this is going to be part of that bigger campaign, right? So Woodfill and his company are going to be moving, and Woodfill is going to be leading them into this village, and they're going to be partially obscured by fog. So as the morning's coming, they're going to be under heavy shelling fire, and the German machine gun fire is going to open them up on them from multiple positions. So they're trying to cross into this area, into this town, into this village of Cunel, and they're going to be immediately pinned down. So they're going to be in a lot of danger, right? Anytime you're attacking a fixed fortification or anytime you're attacking a defensive position, you are in a lot of danger because you're moving, they're dug in. They know you are coming or that you're likely going to be coming, so they're going to have their position set up. So these German machine gunners are going to have their area mapped out, whether physically or mentally. They know if you're going to come in through the wood line, you're going to be, 40, 50, 200 meters, they're going to have their machine guns set up. You're just running, you're trying to pick out those targets as they're attacking you. And you're fighting with rifles, and they're fighting with machine guns at this point if you're moving rapidly. So getting pinned down by these German machine gunners is going to be a terrifying thing, and it's going to be a very devastating thing that could very easily cost you your life. Since Woodfill was in charge of this unit, he's not going to order other men to do what he's not willing to do. So he's not going to order his men to attack. He's going to tell most of his men to take cover, and he's going to assess the situation, right? All these years of experience he's had in the army, fighting Filipino guerrillas and learning tactics and going to schools and everything else, living on his own in the wilderness in Alaska. So he's going to assess this situation, and he's going to remain calm. He's going to move forward, and he's going to start trying to find out where the Germans are. But he doesn't have all the time in the world because the Germans are responding to your attack, right? They can flank you, they can call in artillery, they can call in other support, and they can destroy you. So quick action is going to be needed. So he's going to signal for a couple men to follow him, and he's going to lead those two soldiers ahead to try to find and knock out those enemy machine gun nests. So as they moved across an opening of 150 yards, they went from shell hole to shell hole, where this hellish landscape had been devastated by previous artillery. They have to cross 150 yards, or about 150 meters if you're more familiar with that. Think about how far that is, right? 450 feet-ish. They have to go across this open area where they're a target. So they're bounding from shell hole to shell hole, taking cover, getting that defilade where those machine guns can't hit them. And they ended up confronting 3 German machine gun positions, which were concealed in, according to what I read, one of the machine guns was concealed in some bushes, one was in an old barn, and one was in a derelict church. But the way these are written about in the different accounts, it's hard to distinguish which they're referring to at different times. But what we do know is that Woodfill and these men pushed into the village, and they noticed muzzle flashes coming from a church tower. So Woodfill is going to approach on his own. And he's going to use all these hunting skills he's had, right? All these skills he learned picking up targets quick in the Philippines, having to fight in the jungles, these hit and run tactics, all these skills he's learned hunting big game in Alaska, and all this training he's had in the army. So the Germans are unseen, but he knows where the muzzle flashes are coming from. So he's going to aim his rifle towards where the gunner's head would be, essentially, right? Even though he can't see them, he knows that based on what he sees, they have to be there. So he's going to raise his rifle and he's going to fire. Even though he can't see that machine gun or that person firing, he's going to put effective rounds down range on that target, and that machine gun's going to go silent momentarily, indicating that he had hit that soldier. But immediately thereafter, another German soldier is going to take his place, because these are parts of machine gun crews, right? So Woodfill's going to continue laying down fire, and he's going to repeatedly fire every time that machine gun opens up, and every time that muzzle flash starts to fire, he's going to fire in that same position about where that head would be. He only has 5 shots in his rifle, and he's going to fire 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and he's going to take out 5 German soldiers in that attack, silencing that machine gun. He later stated in an interview to a newspaper, quote, "We were partly screened by low fog, but the moment we appeared, On the crest, the Germans began to pour in shells and machine gun bullets. The enemy was entrenched and also hidden by heavy green woods and was hard to locate. Quick action was needed. I signaled several men to get forward, and I rushed ahead and worked my way across an opening of about 150 yards by crawling from shell hole to shell hole. Then I reached a small knoll, detoured to the left, and worked my way until I got on an improved road from which I could crawl up a muddy ditch to about 10 yards long. When I did this, I could see the gun position. I didn't lose any time. I slid my rifle forward and I placed the butt against my shoulder without exposing any part of my body. Then I raised on my elbows enough to see the gun and killed 5 gunners in the platoon. One enemy gunner attempted to retreat, but I killed him with my pistol. Imagine being those guys that are moving forward with him. This is somebody that you've looked up to in training all this time, but you haven't actually seen him in combat, and now you are moving across this open area. You're going to attack this village. You're pinned down by machine guns, and this guy's doing it, right? He is a very experienced soldier, and you're going to be lucky to have him. So, after taking out this machine gun nest, after taking out these guys, Woodfill's going to reload his rifle, and he's going to move forward. And shortly after, he's going to locate another machine gun position, another one of these 3 that is putting his men down, that is pinning these guys down and stopping this attack from moving forward. And as this machine gun's firing, he's going to move forward again, and he's going to do what he can to eliminate this position. So, just like he stated, he's moving from shell hole to shell hole. He's moving through trench lines. He's finding cover, and he's trying to go where he can to stay out of the range, to stay out of the fire of this machine gun so he can take them out. So as he's doing this, he's going to take cover in a shell hole, and it's actually going to be filled with lingering mustard gas from a previous attack. And mustard gas is this chemical warfare that we've talked, and it settles in the valleys and it settles in the low areas. That's one of the things you'll hear about in World War I, guys diving or guys going low and not wearing their masks. So there's lingering effects of this mustard gas. If anybody's ever dealt with OC or CS or CN in the Army or in the Marine Corps, when you go into the gas chamber, that's what he's dealing with, but much worse. So it's still lingering. So he's going there to get out of the machine gun fire, and now he's going to start coughing, and his eyes are going to be burning, and he's going to be dealing with that. But the enemy's still firing, and his guys are still in danger. So he's going to move his way through the ditch until he's about 40 yards from the enemy machine gun position, and he's going to put himself behind a pile of gravel, which is going to provide him some cover and concealment. And you can just imagine at this point, he's moved all this way. He's been crawling. If any of you guys have ever had to actually low crawl, if any of you guys have actually, had to bound from position to position, and then you're sucking gas, imagine how awful that would be. Imagine how exhausted, how injured he's going to be, how hard his elbows are going to hurt. More importantly, he's exhausted, and his blood is going to be, just pumping. He's going to be trying to catch his breath, and as he's doing so, he's going to be sucking in that contaminated air. His lungs are going to be burning. His eyes are going to be burning. He's coughing and he's spewing from the gas. But the enemy's still in front of him, and his men are still behind him, which means he has one choice, and that's to go forward, and that's what he is, to use his experience to destroy this enemy and protect his guys. Those of you that have dealt with the gas chamber and CS and CN gas, your eyes want to clamp shut. So you can imagine his eyes stinging and clamping shut, and the sweat dripping into his eyes and the sweat dripping down his body. But he has to get a visual on the enemy machine gunner, because he has to use these marksmanship tactics that he has. This skill that he has with the rifle will be useless if your eyes are clamped shut. So he's got to overcome that. He's got to fight through that pain, and he's going to do so. He's going to be able to get a visual on the enemy machine gunner who does not see him. So once again, he's going to fire deadly accurate shots. He's going to put fire down range right on that enemy, and in rapid succession, he's going to kill 3 enemy gunners, according to his citation. He later said 5, but essentially this entire machine gun crew that's going to be set up, he's flanking around it, probably moving through areas they didn't think that anyone would be going through, and he's going to be putting those rounds down range. And once again, he's going to destroy that machine gun position. And he later told a journalist, "I then feared to remain in my position longer, so I dashed to cover of the brush and ran onto an officer who sprang up to disarm me. I killed him with my automatic. I only had gone a short distance when I located another machine gun. I crawled to a flanking position close up to the gun, and I sniped 5 of its crew and silenced the gun." So now Woodfill's operating on his own. He's a machine at this point. The other troops aren't just laying low and doing anything. The other American troops are continuing to assault. They're pushing forward, and they're fighting the way they're trained. But you have Woodfill out front. You have your leader who's not leading by giving orders. He's leading up front. He's putting himself on the line, and he's giving devastating fire. So with these machine guns silence, these two guns, Woodfill's company is able to advance until they're held up once again by another machine gun, which is laying down heavy fire. It's not just these machine guns. There's Germans scattered throughout the village, so Woodfill's actually going to shoot and kill a German sniper who's in a tree before continuing his assault. And I can just imagine these young soldiers watching this, right? Woodfill's a machine, and now he's calling them forward. Woodfill's yelling, come on, move with me, and these guys are going to be advancing. But these German machine guns are going to be delivering murderous fire, that high rate of speed, that high rate of fire that's just going to be, as they're feeding those link belts in and raking where the American troops are going to be advancing. It's going to be a terrifying thing. But once again, these soldiers are going to be watching as their leader charges forward, as Woodfill charges forward to handle this situation. And this has just got to inspire so much confidence, right? Rarely are you going to get to see something like this, but these guys are going to be watching this professional soldier who would seem fearless, but I guarantee you he had a lot of fear. He just had a lot more dedication to his men and to the cause. So he's going to move forward, and he's going to be beginning to take heavy fire as he's doing so. Because of this, he has to take cover. So what he does is he jumps into the enemy's position, which is occupied by German soldiers. And one of these German soldiers, as Woodfill jumps in, he's going to level his Luger at him, and Woodfill's going to shoot him with his pistol. So now he's in close range combat, and he's fighting effectively. So he's going to fire that pistol, he's going to shoot that enemy in the stomach, and that enemy's going to go down doubled over from that wound. Another German soldier grabs a rifle, and Woodfill turns his pistol to fire, but when he does so, his weapon's going to misfire. When I was in basic training, they told us the loudest sound on the battlefield is that click when your gun doesn't fire, right? When your rifle doesn't fire, your pistol doesn't fire. Doesn't matter how many bombs are going off, how many explosions, how many people are screaming, how many machine guns. When you look down the barrel of your weapon and your life is at risk and you hear nothing or you hear that click, it's going to be deafening. So that's what's going to happen. Because the fighting was so entangled, his pistol jammed. But Woodfill doesn't hesitate, right? He's a man of action. He's pushing forward. He has the initiative. So in this chaos of close combat, he's actually going to pick up a pickaxe that's in this German position, a pickaxe. So now we're in hand-to-hand combat, and he's going to bludgeon this German soldier to death with this pickaxe. The other wounded German soldier tried to raise his pistol, and Woodfill destroyed him with a pickaxe as well, destroying the last of the German positions. And Woodfill later told that reporter, I located a third machine gun position, and using the same method of approach as previously applied, I worked my way to a flank position, and then I killed 5 of the gunners. There was heavy fire coming from the right, which caused me to take refuge in an enemy's entrenchment. And as I dashed into it, I nearly jumped onto 2 Germans who were crouching there. One of them started leveling a Luger on me. I fired first. The German doubled and dropped his weapon. The other one reached for his rifle. I squeezed the trigger on him, but my gun failed to fire. I dropped it and I grabbed a pickaxe. I hit the man a crushing blow on the head. As I turned, I saw the other German had regained his pistol, so I let him have it with the pickaxe too. And that's terrifying to me. Hand-to-hand combat is so rare, right? We think of it, you watch it in the movies. Even the Civil War was much more rare than people thought. But this is in World War I. This is moving from this no man's land type combat in the open trenches where you'd never even get close to the enemy. It's just long-range weapon versus long-range weapons. He's moving into a position where he's now fighting with pistols in his hands. He's picking up a pickaxe, bludgeoning someone with it. Hitting that pickaxe, the blood's probably going to spatter back at him. Fire 1 pistol and then kill 2 men with a pickaxe. After his reign of ending 3 machine gun positions, it's going to be just a fierce warrior at this point, right? An unstoppable force. But by this time, he's actually going to be suffering heavily from the exposure to the mustard gas, and he's going to be limping from shrapnel wounds to the thigh. So sometime during this course of his attacks, during his course of taking out these 3 machine gun positions, he was going to be wounded by shrapnel. I don't know if that was from a grenade or artillery or what. But you can imagine if it was in the initial attack or wherever that was, crawling through, he was doing that injured, right? Or jumping through the second machine gun to the third machine gun, he was going to be doing that while injured, while the blood's pumping. I say it every episode, but when you're wounded, you don't know how bad you're wounded. You don't have time to take your pants off and assess your injury, so you don't know if you're going to lose part of your limb or what that's going to be, or if you're going to bleed to death. But he didn't let any of that stop him, and he pushed forward. But thanks to his actions and thanks to destroying these 3 machine gun positions, Company M was able to push on, and they were able to take this objective. They were able to secure this part of Cunel, this village, largely because of what he had done. Because of his injuries, Woodfill was evacuated from the front lines and sent to Bordeaux to recover. He later reported to the battalion, and he told them, in describing exactions, "I got a few." In reality, he had eliminated multiple machine guns and had killed over 20 German soldiers single-handedly. As a result of Woodfill's injuries, he ended up spending 10 weeks in a hospital, mainly recovering from that debilitating effect of that mustard gas, that burning of the lung, that destruction to that tissue, that awful, awful feeling. And I don't know if I even emphasized it enough. I talk about not knowing about your shrapnel injuries, but to me, it's panic-inducing to not be able to breathe. It's panic-inducing to know that you're suffering from gas, to be having, since the beginning of your training, you're hearing stories of how chemical warfare and how awful it is, and then you're going to be seeing guys dying from it, choking to death, vomiting, again, eyes burning, everything, going blind temporarily, and he was dealing with that. So to me, it just shows, even more than the shrapnel wounds, how determined he was to be able to push through that pain. It wasn't a minor effect of the mustard gas, because he ended up being in the hospital for weeks from it, and he was still able to push through and kill these enemy soldiers. Through his courage and his tenacity and his grit, he was effective, and he completed his mission. The war ended on November 11th, 1918, 11/11/11. For those of you guys aren't familiar, that's where Veterans Day comes from. That's the when the guns fell silent on November 11th at 11 a.m. And on January 22nd, 1919, Woodfill was awarded the Medal of Honor for his actions that previous fall. And General John Pershing, Blackjack Pershing, who was a famous, beloved general, was actually the one that presented the medal directly to Woodfill, which would be a huge honor, and he was promoted to captain. And Pershing actually praised Woodfill personally for essentially for fighting and not just occupying the trenches, right? All these guys are just wanting to survive and get through, which is a common thing in warfare. It's human nature. I just have to live long enough for this war to end, but Woodfill didn't. He took the initiative and he pushed forward, and Pershing recognized that. After the war, Woodfill returned to Kentucky, and he ended up leaving the Army in November of 1919. So after all this time, he ended up completing his service to the Army, or what he saw at that time, and he got out. But he quickly found that he wasn't ready for civilian life. So just after a few weeks, I think it was 3 weeks later, he ended up re-enlisting in the Army. And that's a tale as old as time as well. You'll see a lot of guys get out. Either they don't like civilian world, they're not ready for the civilian world, they can't adjust to the lack of order and discipline. So he ended up going right back in. Because the war was over, though, and the military was downsizing massively, he wasn't able to keep his rank, and he had to rejoin as a sergeant, which meant he lost his captain's rank, but it didn't really bother him much. It did bother the public, though. He was a war hero, and he was pretty famous at the time, so when they found out that he had lost his rank, they actually made efforts to appeal the decision, but it didn't go anywhere, and he remained a sergeant. His rank was said to be temporary at the beginning, right? So it stands to reason that after the war, it's going to be downside. Again, just like brevet generals, Custer in the Civil War, a lot of these guys that had gained rank very fast, they don't need those guys. You don't need that many captains in post-World War I Army, so take it or leave it, so he's a sergeant. In 1921, General Pershing again bestowed 2 more honors on Woodfill. When Pershing was asked to name the outstanding American soldier of the Great War, Pershing surprised everyone and said Samuel Woodfill. He said he had always considered him America's greatest doughboy. And that's, again, over these more famous names like Sergeant York, Eddie Rickenbacker, Charles Whittlesey of the Lost Battalion, probably other names that have been forgotten now, all these other Medal of Honor recipients, but General Blackjack Pershing, the commander of the American Expeditionary Forces, said Woodfill himself was America's greatest doughboy. That should be, enough of an endorsement right there. And it's crazy to me that he's not remembered, right? And I don't know why that is. Largely, I think that maybe because there was no movies made about him. Sergeant York is so famous because of the movie, and why would you pick York over Woodfill or not both of them? I think perhaps because of York's pacifist story and how he changed, and during World War II they used him for propaganda drives and that image. But I don't know why it is that Woodfill's so largely forgotten, when at the time he was so well known and so respected. And as more emphasis to that, on November 11th, 1921, they dedicated the Tomb of the Unknown Soldier in Arlington. That's where they do the silent drill every day, every hour, every half hour in the summer, I think it is. When you go to Arlington and you watch, that's the Tomb of the Unknown Soldier. That was dedicated in 1921. And when they did that, there were 8 decorated World War I veterans handpicked by General Pershing to escort the unknown soldier to the burial grounds. And of course, Woodfill was one of them, along with Sergeant York. So Pershing obviously holds him in very, very high regard. And what an honor, right? Most of us recognize, I'll put pictures up here, of the tomb of the unknown soldier. And Woodfill's going to be one of the pallbearers, essentially, that's taking that unknown soldier that represents all of those lost soldiers in World War I who were unable to be identified, and all of the unknown soldiers who died in American history. To be able to put your hands on that casket, you're so honored, or you're so esteemed to represent what it means to be an American serviceman. To be picked as that, it would have to be humbling. I think it's a huge honor, and it shows how high Pershing thought of him and how high the country thought of him. Following World War I, Woodfill ended up spending a great deal of time in the spotlight, but he didn't really enjoy it a lot. It ended up wearing on him. But he was honored across the country. Newspapers would praise his name, and he actually got a standing ovation in the House of Representatives with a reception in his honor, and he was able to meet President Warren G. Harding. And Harding said, quote, "When he shook hands with me, he had the grip of a fighting man," end quote. Woodfill is quite a bit larger and stronger than these other guys. He's lived the life of a soldier, and he's a big dude. So I can see a politician shaking hands with someone like that and realizing, yeah, this is what a soldier's all about. Despite the fame, despite the newspapers, despite the honors, despite Pershing's comments, he remained humble, and his humility was repeatedly noted, as well as this discomfort with being a celebrity. He didn't enjoy the praise. A lot of these guys are thrust into the limelight, and it's hard for them to deal with, or it's uncomfortable for them to deal with. And he expressed his frustration when, again, he was called to Washington. You can imagine all these Veterans Day ceremonies, these Memorial Day ceremonies, these Great War remembrances, they keep calling him. And reportedly, he told his wife he was tired of being a circus pony. And he said that he was tired that every time there was something going on, they trot him out to perform. So kind of like Ira Hayes in the song Ballad of Ira Hayes, right? It becomes performative to a point, and he's living his life. He wants to get on with his life, but whenever they need him, they're bringing him out just like a circus pony. So eventually, this wore on him, and every time they would try to bring him out for a parade or a hometown celebration, he ended up saying, quote, "I hope there won't be any more written about Woodfill," end quote. Just kind of wanting peace and kind of wanting to be left alone later in life. Woodfill remained in the Army, but he ended up finding it difficult to support his family on his soldier's pay. And he was having difficulty making his house payments because, again, he's a sergeant now, not a captain anymore, right? He had to make ends meet and do what he can to support his family. So in 1922, he actually got leave from the Army so he could go work on a dam project in the Ohio River Valley in Kentucky. So one, it shows how hardworking it is. Two, it shows how difficult it is for a soldier, and how, I don't want to say shameful, but shameful that the military is not paying enough for someone to be able to support their family, right? For this guy who's given so much to service to his country to be able to make ends meet and make his house payments in Kentucky. So he has to get leave from the Army and go work on a dam project. So that's going to be pretty rough. And while he's at this work, he's making $6 a day, which is double a sergeant's pay. So this labor job is making twice as much money as he does in the Army. So, but that enabled him to make those payments on his land and he and his wife's home in Fort Thomas. Fortunately for Woodfill, there was a picture of him working on the dam. A key theater interest in New York City actually saw this and probably were thinking, what the hell is this? This active duty soldier, this Medal of Honor recipient having to work manual labor to make ends meet. That's shameful. So they actually gave $10,000 to pay off the mortgage on Woodfill's home and help provide him with life insurance, which is pretty awesome. You kind of like James Cagney and Audie Murphy, right? Seeing him and going, God, somebody's got to help this guy. Somebody who gave so much for our country needs a little bit. So the Keith Theater interests, props to them. I think that's pretty awesome that they did that. And Woodfill, being humble, he was overwhelmed by this, and he offered his heartfelt gratitude to those who made it possible, the freeing of our home from debt. So pretty cool, grateful for that. In 1923, Woodfill retired from the Army officially, and this time he had a pension, which is, huge at the time to be able to support his wife. Following the Army, he took a number of different jobs, including farming and actually being an insurance salesman, which is kind of a unique thing, kind of a weird thing for someone who's done the world traveling and the experiences that he's had, but you do what you got to do. For those of you that are familiar with history, though, as we get into the 1930s, after the stock market crash in 1929, the country's going to be suffering from the Great Depression, and he and his wife are going to be struggling quite a bit. He petitioned to get his pension increased, but it was denied by Congress. And in 1929, he was in deep debt, and he took a job as a night watchman to make ends meet. And he stayed there working as a night watchman until World War II started. And when World War II broke out, the Army actually recalled him in 1942. The idea was they were bringing back some of these heroes of World War I, like Sergeant York and Major Woodfill, Sergeant Woodfill at the time, bringing them back in for morale boosters within the rank and kind of showing these young troops what they can accomplish, giving them heroes to look up to. And he was given special clearance to serve, and he was 59 years old at the time, and he was still an excellent marksman. So they actually commissioned him as a major. That's why I keep calling him major. You call people by their highest rank, again, General Custer. So he was commissioned as a major, and he trained and inspired these young officers as they prepared to move towards these great challenges ahead. When I went to Iraq, when I was in the Army, we actually had some Vietnam vets that were from our unit. The 9th Cavalry would come and talk to us. And it was cool back then, man, to see these guys. So you can imagine these guys in World War II, young 18, 19, 20-year-old kids going to embark on this great crusade, but seeing these heroes of the last war and hearing these stories. So that's what he's going to be doing. And these officers, these young lieutenants and captains, they're going to be hearing from this Medal of Honor recipient, this is what it means to lead. This is what it means to go out in front. So I think that's pretty cool. Unfortunately, in 1943, he did hit the mandatory retirement age of 60. So this was his third time in service, was short-lived, and he was discharged from the Army once again. After leaving the Army, Woodfill decided to sell his home in Kentucky, and he actually moved back to Jefferson County, Indiana, where he had been born. And he bought a small farm near Vevey. If anybody's from Indiana, let me know. It said that his final service to his country was once again to act as a pallbearer. He had previously been a pallbearer at the Tomb of the Unknown Soldier, and this time he was a pallbearer for his former commanding officer, Black Jack Pershing, who was another monumental figure at the time who's not so much remembered, but their paths seemed intertwined, and they definitely had a mutual respect. So I think that's pretty cool that he was able to do that. On August 13th, 1951, Samuel Woodfill was found dead on his farm at the age of 68. Reportedly, he had died of a heart attack several days prior. Younger than I would like him to have been, but he did live a long, adventurous life up to that point. And he was initially buried in a local cemetery, but his body was later reinterred at Arlington National Cemetery in 1955. His final resting place was near General Pershing, who, according to the Indiana Historical Bureau, had once referred to Woodfill as the greatest single hero of the American forces. And that's a fitting tribute from a commanding officer. And I'd like to read Woodfill's Medal of Honor citation. And these World War I citations are a little different. They don't have the intro that the laters do. But his citation reads, "While he was leading his company against the enemy, his line came under heavy machine gun fire, which threatened to hold up his advance. Followed by 2 soldiers at 25 yards, this officer went ahead of his first line towards a machine gun nest and worked his way around its flank, leaving the 2 soldiers in front. When he got within 10 yards of the gun, it ceased firing, and 4 of the enemy appeared, 3 of whom were shot by Lieutenant Woodfill. The 4th, an officer, rushed Lieutenant Woodfill, who attempted to club the officer with his rifle. After a hand-to-hand struggle, Woodfill killed the officer with his pistol. His company thereupon continued to advance, until shortly afterwards, another machine gun nest was encountered. Calling on his men to follow, Woodfill rushed ahead of his line in the face of the heavy fire from the nest, and when several of the enemy appeared above the nest, he shot them, capturing 3 other members of the crew and silencing the gun. A few minutes later, this officer for the 3rd time demonstrated conspicuous daring by charging another machine gun position, killing 5 men in one machine gun pit with his rifle. He then drew his revolver and started to jump into the pit, when 2 other gunners, only a few yards away, turned their gun on him. Failing to kill them with his revolver, He grabbed a pick lying nearby and killed both of them. Inspired by the exceptional courage displayed by this officer, his men pressed on to their objective and under severe shell and machine gun fire. As you can see, the accounts get muddy between, again, the different books I read, the different newspaper articles, so I kind of went with his account. But in any case, what we do know is that Woodfill advanced in front of his men through heavy machine gun fire, through shell fire, through gas, through all the horrific technological monstrosities that war was able to throw at him, and he was successful. We know that Woodfill refused to retreat, refused to back down, refused to cower, refused to give up in the face of this heavy and devastating fire, because his men were behind him and the enemy was in front of him, and Woodfill pushed forward. And I think he was a powerful man and almost the perfect representation of what an American soldier should be, or what an American fighting man should be, or what any fighting man should be. It's unfortunate that Woodfill's not as remembered these days as he should be, but hopefully some of you guys will now remember the name Sam Woodfill, and hopefully we do our part here in helping remember these heroes. So that's the story of Sam Woodfill. If you guys liked it, leave me a comment, leave me a like, subscribe. If you guys want to hear any other particular stories or time periods, we don't get a lot of World War I. If you're interested in World War I, let me know. We can go into a bit more detail. Civil War, whatever you guys would like to hear. There's definitely some other heroes out there I'd like to focus on, but you let me know. So thanks again for watching.